All right, so we are discussing about the community ecology now. If you still remember, we just discussed a little bit on the community ecology last week. What is a community, and then what are the type of interactions that you would see in a community? And if you still remember that the communities, whether it is a sort of a well-structured one or it's something changing, that's something we discussed last week. Right? I hope you still remember that. And there we mentioned that the communities are not really well structured all the time, and they can change over time. Right? So this is especially important when like when life starts from a place where there is no life below, life before. So then the life has to start from the beginning, or otherwise, like if it is a forest, for example, we think of that if the forest is burnt for some reason with a forest fire, and what would happen thereafter? So in the beach, think of that there is a sand that has been accumulated for a long period of time, and then on that sand, like it's a new surface. There is no any plant growth there, but how the life began there, and all these happen because of one of the very important ecological phenomena, that is what we call ecological succession. So what is ecological succession actually? So let's go a little bit further into the, the succession, right? Um, if you take a very simple definition for a succession, which means a change in community, maybe a composition particularly through time. So how a community change its composition over time. Right? In this picture, actually, you can see this how it happened over time, like starting for maybe a very small plant to a little bit larger plant, further larger ones, and then at the end you will have this kind of a community. And this is a usual phenomenon, right? This can be even your home garden, in the forest, anywhere you will see this kind of a thing. Even if you clear some area for uh, some reason, and eventually we will see that still start with some plants, and gradually that will turn into a different communities. If you leave it for a long period of time, then this will have a larger trees and it will have a big community, right? So one thing you will understand here is that when the ecosystems or the communities like this, they are very unstable. So the species that you would see is from here to here is all different. At the same time, the communities will change quite often. But once they get to here, the the community as well as the composition may be more stable. Right? So that is one of the things that you would see in a community succession. Right? So whoever come first to this kind of ecosystem where there was no life before, and we call them as the pioneer community. A pioneer community, right? They are the one who first appear in the in that community or in that particular ecosystem, right? And the other one, right, once it's fully grown, like in this case, is called a climax community. right? From pioneer community to different processes, different changes over the time, and it will end up in like this. It's called climax community. Um, if you remember, Utkarsha Prajao, if I remember, you might have learned this one for your advanced level. Right? So climax community, that's where you get this. Right? So let's go a little bit further into this succession. So it's, I mean, the term is very clear. So succession is changing the community, particularly the species composition of the community over time. And that happened from pioneer community up to a climax community. So as a pioneer community, they are more unstable. They will change or they will replace by one another until they get to a climax community. And that's how the ecological succession take place in nature, right? So this is very important phenomenon, what we call the ecological succession. Without that, we won't have this the forest regrown, right? If there is any damage somewhere, you won't have them recovered. Or if there is a new surfaces that will have on Earth, there won't be any communities developed there. That's everything happened because of this the concept called ecological succession. I hope you can understand this. And in the ecological succession, actually, there are mainly two type of ecological succession called the primary succession and secondary succession. Primary succession and secondary succession. The primary succession means when there is no life before. So if it is the first time that life appears in particular ecosystem, now that's we call the primary succession. And the, the, the other one is when there used to be some life, it has been destroyed for some reason, and there will be another plant growth, and that is we call as a secondary succession, right? So primary succession versus secondary succession. So let me play you a small video, and then we'll talk a little bit further thereafter.
The world is constantly changing. New islands are being created, fires burn in forests, volcanoes explode and destroy areas. Nothing remains the same, and habitats are constantly changing. Ecological succession is a process by which an ecological community undergoes changes following a disturbance or the initial colonization of a new habitat. For example, the islands of Hawaii were formed from volcanic activity. From their fiery start, over time they became tropical islands. There are two main types of succession: primary and secondary. Primary succession occurs in new areas that have little or no soil. In other words, the area has been almost completely destroyed or is newly formed. For example, new islands can be created from lava flows. The lava creates a new land without soil. A volcano may destroy a very large area. This would be an example of primary succession. Over time, dirt is formed, plants begin to grow, and a forest or a grassland may return. The first species that colonized this new land is called the pioneer species. Lichen and moss are many times pioneer species. Secondary succession occurs when an existing ecosystem has been destroyed or disturbed. They are more minor in magnitude compared to a primary succession. For example, a forest fire may destroy a large area of trees and plants, or flooding can destroy an area. In this before and after picture, the fire destroys plants, but the soil remains. 2 years later, the forest has grown back. Here's how secondary succession may occur. Fire destroys plant growth. The fire leaves behind empty but not destroyed soil. Grasses and other plants grow back first. Small bushes and trees begin to colonize the area. Next, fast growing evergreen trees develop to their fullest, while shade tolerant trees develop underneath. Eventually, larger deciduous trees will grow over them, and the ecosystem is similar but different from where it began. These disturbances can actually be healthy for an area over time because they can lead to increased biodiversity. Controlled burns are practiced by many park services. The fires help manage weeds and other growth and helps to reduce the risk of wildfires, but it can also help destroy nutrients and lead to more desirable plant growth in the future. If you'd like to know more about succession, this playlist will help. And as always, thanks for our world is
Right. I think you got some idea about this ecological succession, particularly the primary and the secondary succession. So primary succession is always there is no life, as well as usually there is no even soil. And when there is new soil coming in for some reason, and that's where the primary succession take place. But in the secondary succession, where the soil is already there, and that's where the, the secondary succession uh, coming in into play, right? So there are many different things that happen within a community during this succession. Again, it's going to be a very complicated thing. Um, the who arrives at the beginning or at the first time, we call them as the pioneer community, as you notice. But that pioneer community, that what you see and what you don't see may be different. Right? Now you see even the video talking about the pioneer community as the moss or sometimes lichens, but before that definitely there are some microbes like viruses, the bacteria, the microbes, they appear into this ecosystem, and then only actually the others start growing. Right? So that part, the microbial part, actually we don't see, and then we see as the succession is only the macro part, that what you can see, but the micro part is also there. Unfortunately, we don't discuss that part in usually in ecological succession, but that is very important section as well, right? So here I'm giving some examples for primary succession, for example, and where there is no soil. Um, and here it's an example, in the beach, right? When maybe a rocky beach, sometimes it can be there's no sand, and then when the sand come in and then accumulate in one area, and over the time that just the new fresh sand will start growing in communities, and this is how it has been regrown, right, and then converted into a sort of a forest. And this is what we call as a sand dune. Right? You might have heard about there is a coastal ecosystem we call sand dunes. Right? So this is how a sand dune is formed, and it is started with uh, from the beginning there where there was no life, right? So that sand might be coming from the sea, and there is no any terrestrial plant at the beginning, and then this converted into a sand dune, right? So that's a primary succession, and a secondary succession is here. Um, this is an area cleared for corn farming, like you see area has been fully cleared for farming, and even after that, and then if you abandon it, and this is how it's being regrown, and it make another community here. right? So that's a secondary succession. The secondary succession can be different types, like it can be like this kind of a land clearance, or otherwise it can be like this kind of other disturbances, can be due to fire or some grazing by herbivorous animals, or sometimes even from predators. Sometimes the whole community can change, right? So whatever all these the previous types, actually we call the autotrophic succession, because here in the most of the cases we see the plant growth, right? We don't really talk about the succession of animals, but in most of these cases we talk about the succession of the plant. But it doesn't really mean only the plant. Actually there can be some animals as well, right? But there can be some heterotrophic succession as well. I have given one example. Uh, like some heterotrophic organisms, for example, maybe the bacteria, the other fungi, um, or this kind of the animals depend on the plant. They can also recon in, like this case, on a organic habitat. In this case, it's a dead body, right? So in a dead body, there will be new bacteria coming in, another maybe some uh, insects likewise. So there will be another community developing in on that organic body, right? So that is sort of a heterotrophic succession. That, of course, this kind of a succession won't last long. So, but anyway, there can be some animal succession as well, like, right? So um, as I mentioned, uh, this is another heterotrophic succession. Like with a buffalo, we will have a, without buffalo there can be a different community, and with buffalo they likewise, all depend on the animal uh, interactions, and then it will result in different communities. Actually, these are some of the research that's been done in different part of the world, right? Right, I hope you got some idea about this the primary succession versus secondary succession. And with relate to this the succession, there are some, like through the succession in the community, um, you will see like the some communities, they will support the other plant or the other organisms to grow, right? So we call it as facilitators, right? um, like the maybe the pioneer species, or the second generation who coming into the new environment, and they will do some sort of a facilitator job. They will help other species to grow. And here one example in this one of these plant, uh, it's a legume, so they produce nitrogen, which they add nitrogen to the soil where the other plants can grow, right? So in that case, this plant behave as a facilitator for the other organisms to grow, right? Likewise, uh, the in the primary succession, for example, a bare rock, right? So imagine there is a huge rock in the hilly area. If there is a landslide, the rock will open, and then that the animal or the plant community start to growing in that newly exposed rock, right? So it's a bare rock theoretically, and usually the lichens will start the uh, as the pioneer organism, then by the moss, uh, Parnangorg, and other small plants, right? So the lichens, moss, they actually serve as sort of a facilitator who will support other organisms to grow, right? And this example is actually not from Sri Lanka, right? So so that is the facilitation. But at the same time, there are some other species who will inhibit the growth of other species. Like even though through the succession in the process, there are some species who will inhibit the growth of other species. Um, Here I have taken one example from the bryozoans. Actually, you might not have heard about it. This is actually another phylum. Uh, in between Agenidaria actually, and then sponges, close to sponges, but it's a but different phylum, bryozoan. Um, there are some experimental work that's been done, and that the bryozoans sometimes inhibit the growth of other species, and they play sort of a dominant role in an ecosystem, right? So that similarly, there are some species who will play a dominant role and inhibit the growth of other, right? So that negatively impact on the ecological succession, right? And the other species called the tolerance species, um, that the first species that come into that community, and there will be a second generation, second not generation, another second type of plant that come into, then they will tolerate the first species, or first species will tolerate the second one, and they will coexist. So they will be together, right? So we call this as the tolerance. So they can tolerate the other species, and they will be together, right? Likewise, there can be a lot of differences in a community, in a ecological cycle, right? So um, I had talked to you a couple of times that there are no many examples from Sri Lanka for most of the ecological studies, but this is a different case. So I'm showing some of one of my own work, as well as some of my students' work. These are actually the we have done a lot of this ecological succession studies in the marine environment, particularly looking at the marine invasive species, where we put this kind of a metal uh, structures in the Colombo port and the marine environments, just to understand how the 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 species that attach to the surfaces, it's called as the biofouling. I think I talked this one before. The biofouling species. Uh, how do they attach, and who come first, and how these communities develop over time? So to understand that, we put this uh, we call the settlement plates, or the panels, and then there are a lot of we have understood the process of this ecological succession in the marine environment, right? So I can share some of the things in what you have learned, like from the starting. Uh, uh, this is the process of succession. Like the plate is like this at the beginning, and we check them every 2 weeks time. For quite long period of time, we continuously we monitor these things, what happened over the time, you can see, and and how the communities develop on that the surfaces, right? From this the very early stage to this more community develop, right? So, but you can see even further development of this. Uh, like you see, if you go further, you will see more and more species that coming into this um, the initial plate. You see, this whole thing will be covered with different species within several months' time, right? Right. And you see, even sometimes inhibition and everything, like you see that one species coming in and another species will cover that one, and another one will grow on top of that likewise. There is all these facilitators, the emitters, and tolerant species. Everything will be here if you study a little bit further onto this one, right? So that's a good example just to understand how this ecological succession happen. Um, but in this case, it's more animal rather than the plant, right? So you might have think of that this ecological succession, we're talking about the plant only, but it can happen in animal communities as well, right? So So where we can get this uh, primary succession, in which kind of a places? Right? So this is one of the example we call alluvial deposits. That's the any sediments that coming from the rivers. So they deposit maybe in the close to the beach or the estuary areas, and then this new sediments that deposit, if they deposit one area, so that become a new habitat. There won't be any life there, or there won't be any plants there, and that start growing a new life, right? And as I mentioned before, like the sand dune here, so there is no any plant life, and that if we will left it for quite some time, and then this will start growing some plants, right? Um, the other example is this kind of landslips or landslides, right? So landslides just exposed the soil and the rock when they might not have been ever ever exposed to the environment, right? So and they will start developing new communities, right? And the erosion, right? This kind of erosion that all will expose new environments there for allowing new communities to develop, right? So likewise, there are many examples, uh, though we don't have like a volcanic action. Like here, the volcanic eruptions in a lot of countries that will either destroy whole large area, and where they have to have a secondary suction, or sometimes like what happened with the Hawaii island. There was no actual Hawaii island sometimes back, but that was like a volcanic island. That's Hawaii island is actually erupt as a volcanic activity, and you see now it's one of the beautiful islands in the world, and all the community succession has taken place after this volcanic eruption. Right? Even in the Hawaii island, still building. We see in the beaches, in the close to the beach, you will see even the new volcanic material is being accumulating in there, right? And the other one is the glaciers, right? You know, this due to the global warming, some huge ice caps in the polar region, they uh, just melt, and new surfaces open to the space where they start new communities developing, right? So all these places you can see the what we call this primary succession, right? So how does this happen, this primary suction? As I mentioned before, it will go through several round of community changes, right? From the origin, like from the pioneer community, then lichens or mosses, the ferns, then grasses, then shrubs to trees, like, and at the end it will be more stabilized with the large plant like this, right? So that's how it usually happen, right? So one thing here is like whoever come first, like lichens and mosses, right? Now we can think of the things that we learn, the animal dispersal, right? So you remember something called the dispersal, the range expansion, whatever, right? So like, for example, the bare rock, there is no any life there. Through the dispersal, new plant or animals coming into that place, right? Now you can link with you the other lessons that you learned with the, right? So if there is no something called dispersal, again, even you have the succession, there is no any material to for the succession. So Hawaii Island would not have a community if there is no something called dispersal, right? So the dispersal will come through the maybe from the air, from the birds, maybe even from the sea, something floating. So that's how the seeds or the plant branches might be coming into the the island, and that's how they start life, right? So it's a sort of complex incident, right? Here you see some lichens, right? You might have seen in any rock, you will see like a bare rock, you will see these lichens because they are highly tolerable. They can adapt to this very harsh environment in a rock, right? Imagine how they can attach to a rock, right? So for even for us to even to break this rock will be very difficult. But how these lichens attach to that kind of a hard substrate, like same as that biofouling, like in the ships, the hull or the body, it's very hard surface, but still the animals can attach into that environment, same as the lichen. So they are the pioneer species. They need to have a lot of adaptation to attach to this kind of a hard surfaces. Um, they might have get some help from other organisms, especially the microbes as well, right? So the lichens and the moss plants like this, so they can tolerate these harsh environmental conditions, right? And I am giving an example to the what I said previously. That's the microbial part that you won't see. The same example we discussed earlier. That is the biofouling. You see this is not actually our own slide, but just got from the internet just to show like the plates when you first start with the new plates, and they will covered with this kind of surfaces we call slime is actually a microorganisms, bacteria maybe or other microorganisms. We call this as slime. අපි ඔය සෙවල කියලා කියන්නේ ඒ වගේ දෙයක් ඉස්සෙල්ලාම attach වෙන, but maybe bacteria or some other species. And you see at the beginning you can even clean this one with your finger, right? But this slime gradually change into a different communities, and at the end you will have a very hard substrate where even with a knife or even with a sharp object you can't even remove them, right? So imagine that in the field class you might have seen some oysters attached to the sandstone, right? So how hard they are attaching. So they are actually this kind of biofouling organism, right? So how hard they can attach, right? So all these are adaptations, right? Okay, this is again showing some primary succession from a moss species, right? From moss to the ferns, so they can be the pioneer species that will coming into the environment, right? Um, so this example actually I'm same example that there are some of my students working in the Colombo port, right? I don't know any of you had any chance to go to the Colombo port. So this is how they're working in this the port and putting these test panels. Like at the beginning, like there was nothing, and how they develop over time, right? And that's how we can see the community development over time. And this is a species I talk about, these bryozoans, right? So they're well-known biofouling organisms that you would see in the marine environment. All right. All right. So then the pioneer community, from pioneer community, they will move into a climax community, much stable community, and that will take several steps before becoming a pioneer community into a climax community. So they have to follow so many different steps, and at the end they will have this kind of a stable climax community, right? In this type of climax community, then this community composition and the interaction, they will be more stable than the previous one, right? So I hope you can understand these things. Um, right. So the primary direct succession, then the secondary succession, and there is another type of succession. Actually, there are many different types of succession, but we very basically we talk about this primary succession, secondary succession, and there can be another type of succession. It's called the deflected succession. It's it's like it's a same type of succession, but it might be changed for some reason. For example, so if it is a grassland, now the might be some lichens and the mosses, and there be after you get some grasses. And for we put if we put some the grazing animals, so they will change the community, and that will deflect this succession, and that's where we call the deflected succession. And the climax community you get with that grazing animal will be different from the one without the grazes. Like so, likewise, you can have a deflected succession, right? Um, right. So, some of the concepts with the ecological succession is that um, um, the succession is a response to the disturbance, right? So in many cases, but there can be like if the new life start, but in many cases the succession is actually a response to disturbance, just like your skin when it got hurt and it will repair by this the repair mechanisms. And in the ecology, the succession is that actually the repair mechanism when the ecosystem gets hurt or disturbed, right? So it's this concept of ecological succession is very important, right? So again, the succession is not evolution, right? So in evolution, the same species will change over time, but in this case, the one group of species will replaced by another, right? So it's not an evolution, yeah? Right? And the other thing is, in many cases, it's a little bit predictable, right? Because the succession usually, if you clear a land, you, basically you can imagine what kind of a plant will appear. Right? So it's basically a little bit predictable, right? And also uh, theoretically we can think of the time scales when it's going to happen, like how long will it take to come back to a normal situation, right? So that's about the succession. And in this diagram, you see that, so this is a example for like a bare rock. There's no life, and how it turn into a climax community over the time. Um, we get some background noise, right? Right. You see, they start with the bare rock. This is the bare rock. So, so they are the dominant one at the beginning, right? So over the time, so the bare rock, of course, it will almost disappear, and there's no any show up of them. And the number two is the mosses here. They will increase the number, but eventually there'll be another community who will be developing in, and that with that the mosque will reduce their numbers. That the third one is the grasses, and the woody plants will start growing, and that will replace by the grasses. Likewise, you see how this happened over time. Everything coming in and goes, coming in and goes, right? Until they get into a climax community, a more stable community like this, right? So that's how this succession happened over time, right? I hope you got a very good idea about this succession by now, right? So again, we have to go back to the world situation, because since we don't have many historical data just to show this ecological succession, these are some of the examples. This is it's called the Churchill Island in Canada, right? So after the volcanic eruption, it's way back in 1960s, right? So uh, even before I was born, right? Well before. Um, so this is how it looked like after the volcanic eruption, and the the whole island is like this covered with the volcanic material, and the island has been regrown and recovered from that disturbance, and this is how it looked like today. This today means maybe another 10 years back, right? And it's the mountain is called St. Helens, right? And this is a before volcanic eruption and after volcanic eruption, uh, right? So likewise, there are many examples here, right? After the eruption, this is how it looked like this St. Helens mountain. You can see only the rocks or the hard soils is remaining, and not even the loosely arranged soil. So they have to have grown to grow the plant. You need to have loose soil, right? You have to go through several successions, right? So you can see that um, the St. Helens, right? After this volcanic eruption, you see all the forest has been destroyed. You can see after 5 years how it looked like. There are some plants growth, even you can see some flowers, right? With over time, you can see even larger plants or more bushes, especially this firewood, which is very good at establishing in a new habitat, right? You can see, uh, like you see, this is the actually this yes, the St. Pound Helen is actually after the forest fire, not the volcanic activity. Uh, the forest has been fully burned. It's a blowdown forest, and then this is after 3 years. You can see after 6 years how this the the, the uh, some plants arrived here. You see, these this corn shapes, this plant, they have two types of seeds. One type of seeds is like for general propagation, but there are some very hard uh, type of seeds where they will only open during the forest fire, right? Right. So you see some adaptations that the plant have. I don't think we have this kind of thing in Sri Lanka because we don't have this forest fire. So the the in the areas where the forest fires are common, these trees have developed different types of seeds, right? Some seeds will open only during the forest fire. After the fire, uh, it will burn and once burnt, the seeds will only open, and then they will start growing in that forest thereafter, right? So that's an adaptation, right? This is how it looked like after 11 years, right? Luckily, the thing is like they have this data to show, right? So, but no, there's no many example like this. Uh, this is how this the plant called the lupin is, which can produce nitrogen. They appear in the first time, right? Nitrogen fixing plant, right? Similarly, there are many examples like this is example from Alaska, the retreating ice caps that will expose new environment, and you see this area gradually have turned into there is no ice anymore, and then now you see a sort of a forest. same area now look like a forest, right? All right. As an example, right? 1941, all covered with ice, and you see now it's a lake and nice forest, right? Uh, Less than like around 60 years time, right? Um, Similar incident 909 versus 2000. You see the same place, the photographs you saw, 909 versus 2000. Still there is some ice, but there are a lot of forests. You see, the previously it's just the rock which has been now covered with plant. Um, this is another. It's called the Krakatoa Island. It's also a volcanic eruption. You see the after the eruption, and this is the situation um, once it's recolonized. All right. Similarly, there are a few other examples, even from the Yellowstone National Park. You might have heard about in US, one of the well-known national parks in the world with a huge area. Um, you just search in the Google, you will see the Yellowstone National Park, and there has been a forest fire in Yellowstone, and this is how it looked like after the forest fire. And you see, after just 1 year, how it looked like, and with some weeds, and then you see again that some plants who has resistance seeds, they appears first, right? This is how it looked like after 10 years, and after 20 years, this is how the Yellowstone National Parks look like. Um, all right, so that's how the ecological succession happen over time, um, right? So everywhere, right, even in like in the large forest, like you take even the Sinharaja forest, we will think that it will be a sort of a climax community, but maybe that's during our lifetime. But if you take for hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years, you will have a little bit different communities than what we have today, right? So all these ecosystems are changing over time, uh, and that's happened the succession over time, right? Um, all right, that's all about the ecological succession, one of the very interesting subject in the ecology. One of my interesting subject, at least. I don't know any of you interested on any succession. Um, all right. That's all I have to say about the ecological succession. Of course, you can talk. There are many things, but for your level, this is more than enough. If any of you have a question or comment on the ecological succession.